Hello, in this lesson we'll talk about the individual differences in second language acquisition, and we'll start by talking about age. Let's begin by remembering that second language acquisition is a field of study that focuses on the development of proficiency as acquisition or as learning. We also talk about the acquisition of different kinds of target language, that they could be second languages or foreign languages. And finally, when we talk about second language acquisition, we also focus on not just the acquisition of one single language, but it could be second languages, third languages, and there could be more than one language. So in this case, we can talk about first language acquisition, which is one of the areas of SLA, and also about native bilingualism or bilingual acquisition, and finally second language acquisition or second language learning, which is acquiring language after the age of 3 years old, and this could be in a natural environment or in a classroom. Now, an obvious question related to second language acquisition is whether or not second language learners can be successful in acquiring a second language. To answer this question, we need to look at a number of individual differences in language learners. First of all, age. Secondly, motivation. Then personality. There is also language aptitude, working memory, learning styles, and learning strategies. It is important to say that this is not an extensive list, but it's one that appears in different studies, and also we need to mention that concerning motivation, personality, learning styles, and learning strategies, there are also like a number of subcategories that can be included. But these are the factors that are going to have a very important effect on whether or not second language acquisition may be successful. Let's begin by talking about age. In general terms, we can say that the younger we are when we start learning or acquiring the language, the more effective this is going to be. It is also true that native speakers are more successful and acquire a better accent. And obviously, that older learners are less successful, they make more mistakes, and may have a stronger foreign accent. However, it is also true that some adult learners can be just as successful as L1 speakers. Let's look at some specific differences between child L1 acquisition and adult L2 acquisition. First of all, we can see that in the case of first language acquisition, the process is constant and regular. There are specific stages that all children go through, and at the end of this period of time, which is normally the first 3 years of life, acquisition is complete. The second point is that first language acquisition is spontaneous and natural. This means that children don't have to make any efforts, any conscious efforts to acquire the language. It happens in a spontaneous and natural way. We can also say that L1 acquisition is always complete. There are really few cases, and this could be exceptional due to some specific circumstances, right? In which there might be problems, but invariably, most native speakers are very successful at acquiring their mother tongue. We can also say that native speakers in first language acquisition develop really strong grammatical intuitions. This means that they are able to know the rules of the language in a way that is intuitive and that it's very, very accurate. If we talk about L2 acquisition, we can see that in this case the process is much more variable. This means that different learners will learn at different paces, that there might be like really strong differences between one learner and another learner, and that they don't go necessarily by the same stages that can be easily identifiable. We can also say, in this case, contrasting it with L1 acquisition, that second language acquisition is systematic and goal-oriented. So this means that adults make conscious efforts to try to learn the language, and they may use a number of strategies directed to attaining this goal. And another important thing is that in second language acquisition there could be facilitation. This means that there could be some errors in pronunciation or in grammar that are going to be kept for a long time, and sometimes it is impossible to get rid of them. And last but not least, non-native speakers have indeterminate grammatical intuition. So this means that it is difficult for a non-native speaker of the language to really understand what is possible and what is not possible in terms of grammar of this second language. One last point is obviously that in L2 acquisition there is always the influence of the first language, which could cause transfer at different levels, phonological, grammatical, lexical, and that in some cases it may benefit or hinder the production of the second language. To explain the differences in the level of success between L1 acquisition and L2 acquisition, a specific theory has been developed, which is called the critical period hypothesis. Now, this theory proposes that a linguistic system can only be fully acquired if people are exposed to it before a certain age, which is normally the 3 years of age. This is because that's the period of time in which first languages are acquired. So this brings us to a couple of other questions. The first one is if L2 learners can really become native-like in some domains of the language, but probably not in others. The second question is if native likeness is possible at all. In other words, can second language learners become as successful as native speakers of the language? To answer this question, we need to define native likeness. Now, according to Van Patten, Smith, and Venati, native likeness typically refers to this implicit representation of a language that someone who has grown up speaking that language has. So this includes pronunciation, vocabulary, and what most of us will call grammar. The different studies that have been conducted about age and second language acquisition have come to the following conclusions. First of all, that it is possible for L2 learners to develop advanced proficiency in the second language. It has also been found that L2 learners acquire target-like mental representations for aspects of the L2 that are governed by the universal grammar, as long as they have been exposed to the relevant inputs. Second conclusion is that some L2 components that are not governed by this universal grammar, and we're talking about vocabulary, morphology, and discourse structure, will probably be acquired late and may not be acquired at all. In fact, there are some documented cases of successful L2 acquisition to the very point that native speakers can rate these second language speakers as native-like. But obviously, we need to emphasize that these cases are rather the exception and not the norm. But in conclusion, concerning age, we can say that non-native likeness is probably not directly due to age of acquisition. Instead, the most likely source of non-native likeness is that L2 learners may lack of access to quality input in sufficient quantities. In other words, it is not the age that is going to prevent you from having or developing native-like proficiency in a language, but rather the lack of appropriate and sufficient and quality inputs that allows you to develop all of these characteristics that native speakers have in the use and the mastery of the second language. Second language acquisition then depends on a great number of factors that we call individual differences, and age is one of them. In this lesson, we have talked about the role of age and the impact that it has on second language acquisition. Thanks a lot for your attention, and see you next time.